welcome everyone to my YouTube channel. My name is Ariana Jasmine, and today my Twitch chat keeps telling me to react to a channel called Breaking Points. I quite frankly do not know these people. I've never even seen them, but I'm very excited to react to them. I heard they're pretty big and they're good. So let's get into it. If you haven't already, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, do all of the things that you need to do to promote this video, and let's get into it.
Let's move on to this hostage rescue / massacre that occurred over the weekend. We can put this up on the screen. One woman, this is Noa Argamani, who was captured at that Nova Music Festival, and she really became quite famous because there was some horrifying video of her being captured and taken away. She's crying out for her boyfriend. This is one of the other male hostages who was released. But as part of this quote-unquote rescue mission, you had just an absolute massacre, one of the deadliest days that we have had in this entire Gaza war. You can see here the rubble, you can see dead bodies, you can see the injured, and reports are that from the health ministry that 274 Palestinians were killed in this effort to rescue the 4 hostages. We can put this up on the screen from the Financial Times. They have some more details about what occurred. Their headline here, Israel's raid to free hostages takes horrific toll on central Gaza. Hundreds of Palestinians killed and injured in gun battles and bombardment that accompanied the operation. I'll read you a little bit of—
All right, so far, I don't hate the intro. I do think they could have started off the video with 274 people getting killed because I think that is a pretty big deal. But it does encompass everything that happened, so I just wanted to put that out there.
A bit of this again so you can get some of the details. The raid, which freed those 4 hostages, was a boost, they write, for Netanyahu's government, which has spent the last week arguing whether to agree to a US-backed plan to end the fighting. But the devastating firepower used by Israeli forces also made June 8th the deadliest day for Gazans in months, with the Enclave's health ministry saying the raid, which was accompanied by gun battles and a fierce bombardment, had killed 274 Palestinians and injured 698. One medical chief described the horrific scenes in his hospital after the raid. The director of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital said they came with horrific injuries, torn lower limbs or upper limbs, some with broken skulls, their brains pouring out, some shot in the abdomen, in the intestines. There are women, children, the elderly. Houses have been destroyed and families wiped out. I also wanted to note from that article, you had the chief Israeli military spokesman, Daniel Hagari, because, you know, this is giving credence to those on the Netanyahu side of the equation who say, hey, we don't need a ceasefire, even though that's the way that obviously the largest number of hostages were released by far. And overall, Israel has still killed far more hostages through their military operations than they have rescued. But it's giving credence to this idea of, oh no, we don't need a ceasefire deal. We can just, we can just do this again and just, massacre hundreds of Palestinians to rescue the rest of the hostages. But Daniel Hagari, even the Israeli military spokesman, rejects that view, saying, we know that we cannot do operations to rescue all of them because the conditions won't allow it. We saw already that what brought the biggest number of hostages home was a deal. There is no argument about that. And so, Sagar, I mean, it's one more instance where it's just very clear in terms of the—
All right, let's see what Sagar has to say. I've heard he's a little conservative.
Political elite that Palestinian lives just don't count the same way that Israeli lives do. To celebrate this mission, and listen, I think the hostages should be released. I'm happy for these hostages that they are home with their families, but at the cost of hundreds of Palestinians. This is celebrated as a victory. And, 1,000 dead and injured, more that are trapped under the rubble, and this is considered a victory. I mean, it just shows you how grotesque the immorality around this has become.
Look, I think it's a tragedy, but this is a complicated one because this is one where they actually—
Bro! What are you talking about? What is complicated?
We did achieve militarily what they had sought to. Now, listen, I will say this. The U.S. military does not conduct operations this way. They would never have pulled the trigger. The circumstances are a little bit difficult because what happened is that the vast majority of the deaths occurred after They had stormed the apartment building, and then apparently the vehicle that the Israelis were in broke down. They were getting fired on by RPG, so they called in air support, basically clear out the road, take the hostages out, take them to the helicopter. I agree. I mean, it's an absolute tragedy, the number of civilians killed here. It also was like intentionally placed. I just think militarily, this is a very different operation than, let's say,
Okay, justifying 274 civilians dying, mostly women and children, by, oh, well, they tried to leave, but then they couldn't, so then they had to bring in missiles, and then the missiles, had to hit to open it. And, I think it's just complicated. There's a lot going on, and, they had to do what they had to do. That is insane. That is insane because, number one, according to witnesses who are on the ground that experienced this attack, they alleged that it was actually American troops alongside Israeli troops. So your first point is a little moot, my friend, saying that, oh, well, America would never babes, according to witnesses, America was actually directly involved. So let's put that aside real quick. How do you justify this by saying, oh, well, the trucks just couldn't leave, so they had to bomb the street? That's whack as fuck, and you know it too. That is a terrible, terrible justification for murdering 274 civilians, period.
saying carpet bombing the crap out of a refugee camp and saying, well, we hit a single terrorist. It genuinely was in support of a rescue, like hostage mission. You could see a Western operation like the U.S., something like this go down in a similar situation where our guys get bogged down, the hostages are there, the vehicle that they're in, you have to call in air support. At that point, it is a matter of life and death. I just think this one is a little bit different.
I don't think so.
No, it is. It's very different.
They
than
bombed
bombing
a crowded
refugee camp.
marketplace in the middle of the day.
Yeah, I mean, their troops were at risk.
Nearly 300 Palestinians murdered to rescue 4 people. You're right. I mean, on the one hand, our military would not have greenlit this operation. On the other hand, we were actually involved in some capacity. According to the New York Times, there was an American role. A team of U.S. hostage recovery officials stationed in Israel assisted in the Israeli military's effort by providing intelligence and other support. But going back to your comment.
So, yeah, your point of, well, America would never do this. Do you not know about any CIA coup that has existed ever? This is literally America's MO. America has never given a shit about people's lives so far as they came in between them making money or getting more land or getting more assets that they want. So this guy, I already don't, it's been 5 minutes into this video. I already don't like this Sagar guy. I don't like him. I don't like his ideology.
Back to your comments. I mean, if you had... Imagine Omar Badar, I'm taking this from he made this comment yesterday. I think it's so important. If you had Hamas massacre close to 300 Israelis to rescue 4 of their prisoners, by the way, Israel holds thousands of Palestinian hostages, no one would accept that. No one would accept that. Them going in and massacring innocent kids, women, civilians in a busy, crowded marketplace, taking out entire multi-story apartment buildings to get 4 people, no one would look at that math and say that that's acceptable. So why is it acceptable when it's Israelis?
I would flip it around and say, I think you're making a media point. I don't even disagree with you. I mean, obviously people in the media cut like a lot more slack. But I mean, any nation, group, etc., has the ultimate responsibility to look out for its own troops and for its own people. In this particular case, their people are at risk. They also
had a crap load of ceasefire deals that were given to them, all of which that they declined. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? They used this as a scapegoat to murder and massacre more Palestinian people. Your point is so fucking stupid. I'm about to rage react to this. This guy is just pissing me off.
Have a responsibility to follow the laws of war.
Well,
which, listen, Hamas held these hostages in residential areas. That is a war crime.
Yes.
That does not alleviate the responsibility of Israel or any other nation to take precautions when it comes to civilians. The fact that Hamas does something wrong doesn't give you a get-out-of-jail-free pass. And that's the way that they've acted. That's the entire justification for this entire genocide. They did bad things. They committed war crimes on October 7th. True. So that gives us a green light to do whatever the hell we want to do and not care one bit about Palestinian civilians. I mean, this was the deadliest day we've seen in Gaza in months. It's wholly unjustifiable, especially given the context that there is a deal on the table to rescue all of the hostages without killing a single Palestinian civilian. So if Bibi Netanyahu and the rest of the military establishment and these far-right goons actually care about the hostages, then they would agree to the ceasefire deal that they supposedly put forward themselves.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
justifiable. And they also, let's put this next piece up on the screen. They also, as part of this, disguised combatants in civilian clothing. This is a picture, by the way, this isn't fully verified, but this is the image that was floating.
Yes, the allegation is that they went into the refugee camp disguised as humanitarian aid trucks. Now, when we look at the whole entire picture, you're talking about a society of people, over 1 million people, that have been intentionally starved. Their food, their water, their gas has been taken away. Right? So going in there, allegedly disguised as humanitarian aid trucks, also foul as fuck.
Floating around of this civilian vehicle aid truck. This is the helicopter that landed right by the quote unquote humanitarian pier. The US is saying, oh no, we had nothing to do with it. You know, we didn't use the pier, et cetera, et cetera. But that helicopter is literally right next to the pier. So you make of that.
Didn't the IOF already cosplay as humanitarian aid during the flower bombing? The flower massacre, there's been so many massacres, I've lost track of what happened exactly at each one. Did they bomb, or was that shooting? Was it a shooting and running over people? Actually, we can look it up, but I don't think the flower massacre had airstrikes. Israeli troops fired on crowds of Palestinians gathered to collect okay, yeah, that's what happened. And then they also ran over people with their tanks as well. So yeah, that was not an airstrike.
What you will. But put this next piece up on the screen. This is from Ken Roth. Disguising combatants in civilian clothing to commit hostilities constitutes perfidy. That is a war crime. And this is not from, Palestinian sources, which nobody seems to believe. This is from Israeli news sources. Israel's rescue team reportedly entered the area in a furniture truck driven by a female soldier in civilian clothes. There's a good reason why this is a war crime, which is if you're using civilian trucks, if you're using especially humanitarian aid trucks, think of how much danger aid workers have already been in this conflict. So now you're basically putting an even greater target on their back, because there's a suspicion now, if you see an aid truck, that it could be
That is a phenomenal point that I actually did not think about. That's a phenomenal point. You are creating humanitarian aid PTSD for people. People don't really know how to distinguish between humanitarian aid and an Israeli attack at this point, because they've been convoluting the two for so long.
IDF soldiers coming in to commit another massacre. So that's why that's considered a war crime.
But this is where I just disagree. It's like, well, then all, U.S. special operations are quote unquote a war crime. That's ridiculous.
There's no way this guy's real. Are you serious?
I mean, our people have
What are you
gone
talking
in.
about?
What, you think we haven't sent CIA agents and Delta Force operatives disguised in civilian garb to go smash and grab or like rescue our own hostages or rescue Westerners? Of course we have. We've done it many times.
In an aid truck is another level
sure.
of.
Aid truck, yeah, I agree. I wouldn't do it. Obviously, the Israelis are going to be doing a different thing. But this is what I'm saying about the whole discourse around quote unquote war crime, etc. Like, it's a lot of it is just a farce. It's not the way that people actually operate in a military environment. I think this one is
clearly not the way they operate in the military.
He's like, it's just all a bunch of farce. You guys are all just tripping, honestly. Take a chill pill, bro. You guys are all just mad over nothing. This guy's delusional.
Military environment, but the reason that we have it is so we have language to talk about why it is wrong and why it should be out of bounds. And so that there is some way to put pressure and not just, they can murder people, so why not? Let's just look the other, I guess it's fine.
I wouldn't say you
they got 4 people, so, killing 300 and injuring another 700 and reducing another entire neighborhood to rubble, I guess it's fine because they can do it.
No, it's that look, at the end of the day, they were also under like a huge amount of fire. This was a very different environment. They're under RPG.
So if you want the hostages back, do the ceasefire deal.
I agree.
You don't have to murder a single Palestinian. There don't have to be little kids with their limbs blown off and getting amputations with no anesthetic and no mom and no dad. And by the way, a lot of hatred in their hearts, and God knows what they're going to want to do when they grow up.
I agree that I wouldn't operate this way, but I just think this is very, very substantively different than a lot of the carpet bombing operation that we've seen all throughout Gaza, the intentional withholding of humanitarian aid, etc. But are we really going to say that operators are not allowed to go into a war environment and not, be
in uniformed? Humanitarian?
My guy, we're just saying that 270 plus people and 700 plus people people should not be killed and injured for 4 people when there's clearly other ways that they could be saved without anyone dying. It's not fucking rocket science. It's literally not that confusing.
Aid trucks? Yes.
I mean, look, I'm just not going to say that because given the fact that any U.S. citizen or others who are, if I ever get, abducted, do whatever you need in order to get me back. And I think that's how a lot of people feel.
Do a ceasefire deal.
Well,
Sagar, that's the thing. You're
look,
pretending like this was the only option. Murdering 300 people and injuring 700 others. That was the only, no. And by the way, guess what? The reports are from the health ministry that other hostages were killed, including potentially an American citizen.
That's possible.
Unconfirmed
certainly.
report.
Yeah,
Okay, that's not confirmed.
Yeah.
But we do know that we had a quote from Israeli hostages, just one of the ones just released, who was talking to Haaretz, who said, our greatest fear was the IDF bombing that we heard. So don't talk to me about, this is fine because it got the hostages back. No, if you care about the hostages, do the ceasefire deal. That's what Benny Gantz, who, I'm no fan of, that's what he's saying. That's what the Israeli public is demanding. That's what the protests are all about. That's, by the way, even what the Israeli military spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, is saying, this is not sustainable. The way to get the hostages back isn't to murder little kids. It's to do a ceasefire deal and end this war. So no, I don't think it's excusable. And if you look at past historical examples of successful hostage rescue missions, there was a thread that somebody put out online. I wish I had it in front of me, but you'll see 0 civilians killed, 0, maybe 3 civilians killed. 270? No, it's not proportionate. It's not acceptable, especially again when there is a deal on the table that could bring all the hostages home and not require a single death.
I don't disagree that they should take the ceasefire deal. I agree that
There have been both permanent ceasefire deals as well as temporary ceasefire deals put in front of Israel, and their cabinets always decline all of them. So, to answer your question, yes to both.
the U.S. military never would have done this. We have a much higher level of professionalism, thank God, in terms of the people that we run. Our substantive disagreement is about the idea that you're not allowed to use military force in the course of a...
This guy just repeated his point when Crystal literally told him that the American military was directly involved with this operation. So this idea that the American military would never do this, my God, the American military was involved with this operation. What the fuck are you yapping about?
A hostage rescue mission, which look,
did I say that?
No, but that's
I didn't say that.
No, but that's
so then how is that the disagreement?
But that's what happened. Is
no,
that they went
300
in, they
people
grabbed their
killed
hostages
is unacceptable.
in the middle of that operation. Their car broke down because they were getting RPGs and machine guns fired at them, and they called in air support. That the exact.
It's almost like a tape recorder that doesn't want to listen. It's almost like talking to a wall with this guy, honestly.
Same thing that any Western-style military would do in the exact same situation.
They provided cover and bombing on the way in and the way out. They did it during the day when there was a busy marketplace there, and that's how so many civilians were murdered. Not to mention, they took out multiple residential buildings, not just the 2 that the hostages were being held in. Not to mention, very possible that they killed their own hostages in this operation. So no. We wouldn't have done it. It's not acceptable. We have also committed war crimes. I'm not excusing us and pretending like we're angels, but I just don't see how you look at this and say this was fine, this was acceptable.
It was fine.
Well, that seems to be what you're arguing.
I think it is substantively different than many of the other things that have been committed. And
but they say the same thing. They say, oh, well, we bombed the refugee. Well, we got a Hamas baddie, so it's fine. We accomplished our military
that's
goal.
obviously ridiculous.
And how is this different?
Because they were in the middle of a rescue operation. It literally is different whenever you have your own troops and the civilians.
Disproportionate.
Or whatever,
Insanely disproportionate. I mean, it's outrageous.
He says they were in the middle of a rescue operation, therefore they were allowed to do whatever they needed to do to survive. Okay, fine. His argument is still obsolete because that rescue operation, guess what? Never had to even happen in the first place if the cabinet would have just accepted a fucking ceasefire deal.
Just to say that it's acceptable to have 300 dead to rescue 4 people when you could get them all of the hostages and protect all of the hostages who are, again, at risk because of the IDF bombing operation without killing a single person. I just can't agree with this whatsoever.
But the reason that I'm pushing back, Crystal, is because of exactly like the Ken Roth rhetoric, this idea that, you're never, you can't dress in civilian garb. I mean, I just think at a certain point, we all need to stop living in a fantasy land where everybody is just going to be abiding by the laws of war.
Oh, we're not living in a fantasy land.
No,
we're living in a nightmare.
Yeah.
People in Gaza are living in hell on earth. And so it's disgusting to me that we have US politicians who claim this as a victory when, again, if the shoe was on the other foot and it was 4 Palestinian hostages who were rescued in an operation that killed hundreds of Israelis, no one would say that was okay. And it wouldn't be okay. I wouldn't say it was okay. But because Palestine...
How does she do it? How does she do this? I would have literally been raging on the other side of the table. I would have not been able to keep my cool. I would have not been able to keep my cool. I would have just been like, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't have been like that, but I don't know how she does it.
Palestinians are so dehumanized and considered so inconsequential. It's just fine to wave your hand, as it's fine for it to be collateral damage.
Like I said, I think you're arguing against media personalities, which I don't even necessarily disagree with. What I'm saying, and honestly though, if I was looking at it from a Hamas perspective, if I was Palestinian and 4 of our guys needed to be rescued.
What the fuck does he mean you're arguing against media personalities? The media personality that's sitting across her is you, and she's responding to your argument. So I don't, like, I'm so, what is that? What does that even mean? He's like, listen, you're responding to other people in media, and I don't even disagree with you, but like that does not make any sense. His response makes 0 sense.
Rescued, and then people were shooting at the people who were going to go rescue them, and you did whatever it took in order to get them out. I'd be like, yeah, okay. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but if I was in their position, I'd probably do the exact same thing. Most rational nation states and or military groups would do that.
That's
now,
not true. You just said that we wouldn't do it.
No. Well,
you just said we wouldn't do it,
I said
Saagar.
we would not plan an operation this way, but if we found ourselves in a situation
then
where
point to the example where we did something
well, it's
equivalent.
been a long time. I'm
point to a single example. No.
Caleb
Again,
Mueller, I think, was our last rescue
I'm
operation.
not saying we're perfect, right? We commit war crimes also. I've been very critical. But you can't say any rational nation state would do it and also say we never would have done it.
No, I said we wouldn't plan a military operation this way, but in a similar circumstance, though, if our people were under fire in the middle of a hostage rescue mission, there was no other way to get out, absolutely, U.S. military would probably pull the trigger in the same way.
But you can't point to an example where it's happened.
Well, that's what I said. I don't even know the last time I had a major rescue operation. I want to say it was Caleb Mueller under ICE. That was almost, I think, 7, 8 years ago since the last time. Now, we've operated in a very different environment. I can't necessarily say same thing. I think, again, we have a much higher level of professionalism and conduct than the way that they execute military operations. But the disagreement, as I said, is both about the difference in the way that they're quote unquote killing terrorists and terrorizing the population as opposed to a single thing. And my big disagreement is with a lot of this idea that, that we're just supposed to conduct military operations in some sort of world where everybody just abides by the laws of war. It's not like they weren't getting shelled, shot at, and bombed by Hamas
I do think that we should avoid war crimes. I think we should avoid massacre.
He's just like Sundry Clown Car said in the chat, he's stuck in this loop, right? And you can argue that, the military was just getting shot by Hamas. The military had to go grab the hostages. The military had to do X, Y, Z, LMNOP. But at the end of the day, the military didn't have to do shit because if a ceasefire deal would have been accepted by Israel's cabinet, the hostages could have came home in a much more cleaner manner. Why is this so hard for his brain to grasp?
I agree, it would be nice, but it's
hundreds
not
of
gonna
innocent
happen.
Civilians, okay? And by the way, there's a hostage deal on the table. And by the way, this puts hostages further at risk. And by the way, it fuels the hatred that will lead to more terrorism in the future. This was a political play for Bibi Netanyahu in order to keep his grip on power at the expense of 1,000 Palestinians between the dead and the injured. Okay, there was nothing justifiable about it. And I think it is a disgusting worldview that just dismisses this level of quote unquote collateral damage as being acceptable in any context. Let me move on.
Okay, but this is what I'm saying. You can't just call it a disgusting worldview.
It is.
Then there's no operation ever where the right of self-defense or military, hostage rescue can happen under this. It's just not.
No,
it's literally
that's not
impossible.
true, Saagar.
You're
that
applying
is
to a
not
specific context.
true.
I'm talking in a bigger generality. Which, look, I have not disagreed that there shouldn't be a ceasefire deal, but I'm sorry, this is just that is frankly a pie in the sky worldview where everybody signs the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, you know what? The reality is, I would like to live in that world, but I acknowledge I don't live in in that world. But even acknowledging the imperfect world we live in, you also have to admit that our military wouldn't have greenlit this operation, that you can't point to another hostage rescue mission that led to hundreds of deaths. And so to pretend like this is all fine and good and just in the normal course of operations, no, this is outrageously outside of what the world has looked like and what quote unquote rational nation state actors, including our own very imperfect country, has done in the past.
No, what, again, like I'm just gonna reiterate, like it really does come down to what it was going to look like in the context of an actual military operation whenever you're literally rescuing hostages, a vehicle breaks down. It's like, what are you supposed to do? You know, you're gonna die or you're gonna get your way out. There actually is a zero-sum game whenever it comes down to that exact situation.
You are supposed to protect.
I'm not gonna keep refuting him because he keeps saying the same fucking point over and over again. Like I said, he's like a tape recorder.
Protect civilians. You are supposed to, if you are a soldier, guess what? Part of your responsibility is to risk your life to protect civilians.
I agree with that. Yes.
Okay, well, that's not what happened here. Okay,
well,
so
no, but
and
also,
again, don't greenlight such a dangerous operation to start with if it's going to potentially lead to hundreds of deaths. And if you care about the hostages, do the ceasefire deal. So I just, you know, on every level, I find it outrageous that this is considered in any way justifiable or acceptable.
I would put it just, look, I agree that the ceasefire deal should happen, and in some ways I think we're almost talking past each other. But I guess where really my major objection comes down to is a lot of the worldview that is put forward, I would say, by a progressive left in the context of this conflict just leaves no room for like a military to operate. And in a military to operate in a manner which I think is quote unquote justifiable, not necessarily saying in this particular instance. What I mean by that is hostage rescues, the ability to conduct war, you know, this idea that you're not supposed to disguise yourself.
Sagar,
I mean,
how can we at this point? I mean, listen, the official number is close to 40,000 dead. We both know it.
So I don't really understand his point, and maybe it's because his point crossed my mind or something, but he's basically saying that the progressive left doesn't want any more military action. And I'm so confused because it's like, yeah, we don't want any more military action when you want a ceasefire. Is that not the point of a ceasefire? Am I the only one that just genuinely doesn't really... The point of a ceasefire is to have no more military operation. Yeah, you fucking weirdo. That's the point. Also, going beyond that, right? We don't want any more military occupation within Gaza because military occupation is what has led us to this point that we're at now. I don't get it. I don't understand his points. Maybe I'm missing something.
No, it's probably far more than that.
Probably 100,000.
When we know that more bombs have been dropped on Gaza Strip than in World War II, the devastation is more extensive than Dresden, right? When we know you have the largest population of child amputees in the world, when we know that starvation has been used as a tool of war, when we know that our political class and the Israeli political class and the entire Israeli society, with very few extremely brave exceptions, so trivializes Palestinian lives that hundreds of Palestinians being murdered to rescue 4 people is considered acceptable. When we have seen what's happened over all these months, how are you going to criticize the progressive left or whatever terminology you use for saying that this is unacceptable? Listen, I was never someone who said that there was absolutely no room for any sort of military operation in the wake of October 7th. Mm-hmm. But as we've discussed from the beginning, the way they've gone about it from the jump has been unacceptable from their own national security interests, and certainly from the interests of respecting any sort of humanitarian and lives of Palestinians. I mean, you have people who are starving to death. You have a famine. You have humanitarian aid that is completely blocked. You have an entire hospital system that is completely decimated. And so to say it's been unreasonable to object to the way that this war has been conducted, I find that completely outrageous.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. What I said is it's unreasonable to expect that it is unreasonable to apply, let's say, the same level of outrage, logic, etc., that we would on a bombing a military or a refugee camp or leveling a building in order to kill 1 or 2 people who allegedly may or may not have been there, as opposed to an operation where the fire was the vast majority of the death, according to the Washington Post and according to the Financial Times, occurred after the hostages were successfully rescued and their vehicle broke down as a result of Hamas RPGs, machine gun fire, and there basically was a zero-sum game where they were either going to die or live and be able to.
The zero-sum game would have never had to happen if they would have just accepted a ceasefire deal. But his brain is too small to get that, so.
Be able to shoot their way out. That is a very, very different situation, and one in which collateral damage is genuinely a tragedy, but is very, very different
but it's
than
not
how
different.
we would have looked at
but
if
it's
you
not
had
different
the option
because,
to do. Look,
listen, if you buy that logic, that's the same as accepting like, oh, but you know, the refugee camp, yeah, they killed 200,
No,
I
and
think.
I'll tell you why.
No,
Because
hold on, let me finish. Because they say we got 2 Hamas, it was a legitimate military target. There were 2 Hamas bad guys. We got those bad guys. Collateral damage, it's sad,
The
but
reason
guess
why
what?
it's
That's the
substantively
thought.
different
It's war. War
is
is how.
in this particular case, they actually did send special operating troops into the ground. Didn't kill that many people on the way in. Allegedly, at least according to the multiple write-ups and other things that I have seen, and that the vast majority of the casualties were suffered after they actually did what I have been saying they should have been.
Okay, you want to argue timeline semantics? No one gives a fuck. The point of this whole entire debate is that 271 people were killed and more than 700 people were injured. My guy, your point is moot. I don't give a fuck if it happened before. I don't give a fuck if it happened after. I don't give a fuck if it happened during. The point is that for them to take out 4 hostages, they had to murder and injure X amount of people. And we find that despicable because those people were civilians who were told to go to that refugee camp because they were told that it was safe. So he's just really not fucking getting it. He's not getting the point. He's not getting the argument. He's going in this useless fucking circle. Like, you are not understanding the point, my guy. I don't care at what stage of this operation this happened. X amount of civilians died. And that's what you need to give a fuck about. Mind you, they didn't even have to die. They didn't even have to die. If Israel would have just accepted a fucking hostage deal, it wouldn't have even had to happen.
It should have been done from the beginning, which is put their own soldiers at risk and grab their hostages in order to get them out. And or if you want to kill a terrorist in a refugee camp, you should do exactly this. You should drop people down on the ground and you should go and kill them, and then you should get yourself out.
So I think we also need to acknowledge that those reports are coming from what the IDF is saying to.
Sure. I mean, what else are we supposed to do? I mean, we have a limited amount of.
Listen to Palestinians who are on the ground who are talking about what happened.
Yeah, and they're saying that the vast majority of the deaths.
So why did they have to decimate multiple apartment buildings that weren't holding hostages? What about that? What about the people who were buried under the rubble in these apartment buildings that had nothing to do with holding hostages? What about the air cover that they provided, quote unquote air cover that they provided on the way in, which also included gunfire and bombing? So, I mean, listen, I think we should just move on because we're obviously not going to agree on this. And, you know, I think it's wholly unacceptable to think that 4 hostages, and by the way, other hostages possibly killed and put at risk in exchange for 300 Palestinian lives and another 700 who have been, you know, maimed and seriously injured and more reportedly under the rubble. To think that that's acceptable or justifiable, we're just not gonna agree.
We can move on.
All right, there was another thing that was put out by Israel claiming that New York Post wrote this up. This all comes directly from IDF sources, claiming that an Al Jazeera journalist was holding 3 hostages in his home. This man's name is Abdallah Al-Jamal. No one is disputing.
This was disproven. It was disproven.
That he was in fact killed by the IDF along with his family members when his home in Gaza was stormed. The Israeli military, or the Israeli government rather, put out a statement claiming, number 1, that he was an Al Jazeera journalist, and number 2, that he was holding hostages. As per usual, no evidence of this was offered whatsoever. So let's put this next piece up on the screen. First, by the way, Israel had claimed that he was holding the woman Noah Argamani hostage in his home. Then when it became clear that wasn't the case, they claimed that he was keeping the 3 male hostages, so the story was shifting. And there were a lot of inconsistencies here. For one, Abdullah apparently lived in an apartment that was on the 1st floor in a multi-story building. Israel claimed those hostages were found on the 3rd floor. And it also, you know, they didn't offer any evidence, so this is very much in dispute. It also comes, and we can put this next piece up on the screen, from Al Jazeera, they put out a statement saying the X account of the Israeli Ministry of Defense and some Israeli websites quoted the name of a Palestinian journalist from Gaza called Abdullah al-Jamal and claimed that he works with Al Jazeera, that his name was linked to what happened in the Israeli army's liberation of 4 prisoners in the central Gaza Strip on Saturday. Al Jazeera Media Network confirms that he never worked with the network. He did contribute to an op-ed in 2019, and these allegations are completely unfounded. Network stresses that these allegations are continuation of the process of slander and misinformation.
At this point, if the IDF says something and you're just like, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's true. That definitely happened. That is natural selection. You are a fucking dumbass. Sorry, not fucking sorry. Literally, the IDF has lied and lied and lied and lied about so many different things. If you genuinely look at an IDF spokesperson and you say, you know what? Yeah, I believe you. I think you're right. I believe everything that you and your government are saying. Natural selection. You want to be lied to. Maybe you like being defamed. Maybe that's something that you're into. But for me personally, there is never a point in my life where I look at what an IDF spokesperson says and I'm like, you know what? That sounds good. I'm game. Literally never.
Aimed at harming Al Jazeera's reputation, professionalism, and independence. So it appears like, and this was verified, by the way, by other news outlets, he contributed to an op-ed in 2019. So to call him like an Al Jazeera journalist is a stretch. And anyway, they don't offer any evidence that he had anything to do with holding the hostages.
Yeah, this was going everywhere because Jamal works for, and maybe you can tell me more about this, for some organization registered here in the U.S. called Palestinian Chronicles, which is a 501c3 organization. So I guess it was up in the air, the question of whether he, and by the way, why does any of this matter? Because of a lot of the claims around journalists. And so we wanted to actually break down and to look at it. I agree, based on the circumstances, it does look like they originally claimed that he was holding a certain hostage, and then based on the floor number that they then changed afterwards, it's possible that he lived in the building. The reason why, again, this matters is that I have seen this blown up all over the American right and like the pro-Israel right, because now they're going after Palestinian Chronicles 501c3 tax status here in the U.S. But from what it looks like, he did live in the building. Now, I mean, that's not necessarily a good thing, you know, in terms of whether he knew or not whether these people were being held in the same apartment building as him. But from what they said, their story has changed twice now so far as to whether he lived or whether he was holding these people or not. They also said that his father was responsible, and that's the part where I'm very confused about from the initial explanation.
Well, because the father was also killed in the raid. So, you know, Israel should offer some evidence. If they have evidence to back up these claims, then, you know, at this point, they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt in any respect. And so the things that are very suspicious is, number one, the story shifting, right? Number two, the fact that they really tried to tie him to Al Jazeera, which, I mean, it's preposterous. Like, I've contributed to some op-ed at some newspaper sometime in the past, and that doesn't make me part of their journalistic staff, right? And given the fact that they've banned Al Jazeera in Israel, and they have tried to paint them as quote unquote Hamas. So they were clearly trying to use this guy to further their own propaganda talking points. And then when you have these questions about like the floor number he lived on is not the one that they claimed that the hostages were being held on, just, you know, there's a lot of reasons to be very skeptical, I would say, of the claims that they are ultimately making here. Yeah,
I'm waiting to see, because this actually could turn into a big thing here in the country in terms of congressional investigation. This could basically become the next like 501c3 thing. It's one of the reasons we want to get to the bottom of it here on the show. Hey, if you like.
Okay, that was my first time watching Breaking Points. I really like Crystal. I think she's good. I don't like Saagar. I don't like Saagar. Saagar is not for me. But I will watch it for Crystal, because I do fuck with Crystal's viewpoints. Overall, I think she was very cohesive and concise. I think she made great arguments, and I agreed with almost everything she said. Saagar, though, not my cup of tea. But honestly, no hate. We need discourse like that for us to see all viewpoints of all different sides. Honestly, I genuinely do believe in having productive discourse. I really do. And I believe that these kinds of productive discourse, as much as I was reacting to it. I think they're really important. I think that they add on to people's education, especially if you lean a certain way that's not really likable. You can watch a discourse like that and say, hey, maybe the way I'm thinking isn't that great, right? And I think that Crystal did a great job at holding her cool, keeping her calm, and being able to have that cohesive and conductive conversation to where a person can make their own opinions coming out of the conversation. Now, with that being said, would I be able to do that? Probably not. But, you know, I love that she was able to do it. And I think that it worked. You know, it definitely worked. I was rage reacting, but at the end of the day, I still liked watching it. I hate to say it. Even though I think Sagar is insufferable. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this YouTube channel. My name is Ariana Jasmine. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, do everything you have to do to boost this video, and I'll see you guys next time.